presentation, we're going to be talking about mental toughness. Is it something that people have automatically, or is it something as a coach or consultant or an athlete? Can you build upon that? Can you make your athlete or help make your athlete tougher? Or if you are an athlete, can you become tougher with mental skills training? We're also going to be talking about grit. It's another aspect of being mentally tough. It's one of the things that immediately separates those that try to go through the Navy SEAL program. You have Olympic trained athletes seemingly that flush out ringing a bell within the first week or two out of training. How is that possible? They lose their purpose. This is all about grit, where others will literally, seemingly die before they quit. This is an aspect of grit. And then also we're going to finish up this particular module with the thing that's called Self-Determination Theory. So self-determination is a way of motivating or helping an athlete motivate themselves so that they can build grit and they can also add to their overall mental toughness. So many things in our business has been now so trivialized. For example, the term, the phrase, you got to become mentally tough. Well, that's great to say it, and it looks real fancy, on paper, but it doesn't give information to the person that you're trying to become mentally tough. How do they get more mentally tough? If they don't have it already, then how can you, as a consultant, coach, or as an athlete, how do you build mental toughness without first destroying yourself, or having someone else help to destroy you or any kind of future hope that you have for success? So how does an athlete, a coach, or a consultant help someone build mental toughness? Well, I guess the first thing we have to have is a complete academic, if you would, interpretation of what is mental toughness. And quite frankly, it just simply means it's the ability to continue to go on. So an athlete gets knocked down, it's their resiliency to be able to bounce back in the face of adversity. And so this whole thing about that statement right there, we're getting, once you go down this psychological rabbit hole, you're getting real close now to who the person is. And that is a very powerful place to be, but you got to use it with prudence because we're at the core of the individual. And so maybe the Navy, they don't have time for that. But as a consultant, we're not out there training soldiers in the face of life or death, whereas a Navy SEAL operator is literally facing death. And so they perhaps don't spend a lot of time in the, sort of the counseling or therapy part of mental skills training. They need to separate those people. Even though they're in terrific physical condition, they've got to be able to identify the people that are going to continue to go and get up even in the face of death. So that's why I feel like this subject of mental toughness is a big part of it is genetic, because some people just have a predisposition to becoming a risk taker, where others are more prudent. They're more of like I don't want to quite say the intellectual type, but they contemplate, they're trying to look at different ways, figure things out than just point A to point B. And so I'm not sure it really can be categorized as intelligence, but maybe the word I'm looking for in this context anyway is, again, the word prudence, meaning that someone is taking a more calculated approach to success, where if you're in a situation in a firefight, you may literally not have time to make those decisions. But as an athlete, certainly as sports that have a long period of time to think, golf, so forth and so on, there is time. You got time to think. So then you can hopefully help the athlete become more mentally tough over a period of time, helping them help themselves, in fact, with drills, positive self-talk, supportive kind of self-talk, but then helping them understand that being negative or critical on themselves is one of the ways that perhaps they're, beating themselves up, and then that in turn reduces their ability to bounce back. Subconscious mind says, what's the purpose of all this? Why am I going to continue to go on beating myself up over this kind of a thing? And so then it's easier just to walk away from the game. What's the purpose of all this kind of thing? Whereas a person that's a Navy SEAL or someone going in that business, they don't have time for contemplation. They've got to take action immediately. That is the difference, in my view, of athleticism, if you would, in what we're doing as far as mental toughness, and then military mental toughness. One is spot on, now, immediate, no time. The other, maybe some time for contemplation. So with that, let's move into, like I said, the academic definition of mental toughness is the ability to bounce back in lieu of or in spite of adversity, the ability to pick yourself up. And then now let's talk about 3 ways in which a coach or a consultant, or if you are an athlete, you can build your degree to become more mental tough. I think one of the first things to understand is, why would a person lose their mental toughness if they have a degree of being mentally tough? How do they lose that? Well, from my experience and with the athletes that I have dealt with, certainly on the teenagers, it's their perception of how they think others are looking at them. And so they don't want to be embarrassed, you see. And so it's easier then to walk away or not get off the bench or not hit that shot. It's based on fear. It's the fear of what other people are going to be saying to them. And so then if they're focused on that and what they're trying not to achieve, instead of focusing on what they want to achieve, they're focused now on what to avoid. I'm trying to avoid being humiliated and being judged by others. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Well, now we're getting close. We're at a self-image, self-perception, global self-image here, overall, in other words. So the athlete now is concerned about what other people are thinking about them. And so part of how you can help them, or you can help yourself, is to know this. Unless you are an Olympic athlete, there's not many people that care, really, and deeply care about your performance. Now, you will be judged, obviously, if you're in that business, right? I mean, if you're a gymnast or, you're an equestrian athlete or something like that, you're going to be judged, yes, with numbers. But 5 minutes after your performance, probably not many people are going to be talking about that. They're going to be moving on to the next one. But then what happens frequently, and in my experience, is these athletes, sometimes if they're judged harshly, they feel like they didn't deserve that, sort of a low score or whatever. They take it real personal. So there's no line, between the athlete and the person. There's been a blurring of that. And then they then take the judgment as something attached to themselves. I've gotten a 3 out of 10, then I as a person am a 3 out of 10, I am a failure. And so that would be one of the first things, is to help this person with their perception that the judgment that they have experienced is not a reflection of who they are as a person. There has to be a line there in between the athlete and the individual. So then you would simply discuss with this person, help them to understand that this is not a reflection of them as a person. They are a fantastic person, I'm sure. But as an athlete, they had a subpar routine. That's okay. We're going to figure it out and move forward. That's all. Just make it as pragmatic as possible. It's not a personal thing, but many teenage athletes who are not developed yet here, and not emotionally regulated yet, many times they'll take it real personal, take it very hard. That's the first thing about being and helping an athlete become mentally tough, getting them in the proper perspective to understand, look, this happens to everybody. There is no perfect athlete. It never has been. And so it's just a thing that failure is just a thing that just something you're going to have to deal with. And if you can't deal with failure, I don't know of any athlete. I can't think of one athlete that's been very, very, very successful that has not had some, and maybe even quite a bit of failure. Why is that? It's because the game changes on a daily basis. No game stays the same every single day. Even in the game of chess, you've got a different athlete or different opponent, so they're going to have different moves. And so you have to adapt to those kind of things. So adaptation of mind, being pliable in the mind, helping the athlete to understand there is not really point A to point B in a straight line. This is part of grit. Now, is there a difference? A little bit between being mentally tough and being gritty, but grittiness is, I would think in my mind, grittiness is a component of being mentally tough. So let's talk about now grit, how to build that in yourself or your client. We think of a gritty person is a person who, when they get knocked down, they just keep coming right back up. It's like a bulldog, they just, they've got that disposition. Not like maybe a poodle, you yell at it just goes and cowers in the corner. A bulldog, yell at it might charge back at you, something like that. And so then you can almost say then, well, if that's the case, then is a person more psychologically dispositioned for these types of personality traits? And the answer probably is yes. Some people just have these components of their personality. It's just part of their DNA. They just will not quit. Now, that sometimes can not be a very good thing, because then that person, sometimes they don't know when to quit. And so that's when you help that athlete, or you can help that athlete make the determination that, look, not quitting, yes, but if you can't get to your goal from where you are, then you've got to find another way to get there. It's not just pounding your head up against the wall, hitting your hands up against a stone saying you're going to move. No. We just go around the stone and then help that athlete to understand the goal is the goal. And that's why smart goal setting, and I did this module on goal setting, that is why it is so important to help an athlete build grit and mental toughness. Why is that? Because success, self-efficacy is the major component in building mental toughness. If you have an athlete that continues to get beat down every single day without any success, they're going to lose their purpose. Why am I doing this? And now we're at the bottom of the rabbit hole. Why? The why is the ultimate perspective. Why am I doing this? And if it's not for fun, then what are they doing it for? Well, it could be extrinsically motivated in that they're looking at it for a money thing, and that you see that sometimes when an athlete comes out of college and they sign a big contract with a football team, whatever, they get injured. Now, it's interesting, right? There's no way really to document that, but you see it a lot when an athlete comes out of college and they've never been injured in college. They sign a $40 million contract and then they get injured in training camp. And so then you can say, well, it was just a fluke. Well, they practiced just as hard in college than they did in professional. Then what can we say? Well, the athlete may have been extrinsically motivated, whereas the money was their goal to begin with. So once they achieve their goal, then they've lost their motivation. They stop trying as much, maybe, or let their guard down, and then in that field, like in football, then that's a good way to get yourself injured. It's just a thought. It's possible. I've noticed it for over a long period of time, watching athletes come from college into the professional, and then they get injured almost immediately. It seems some of them do. It's almost as soon as that check is signed. So you may have an athlete then that's extrinsically motivated, meaning that they're really in it for the prize, and in this case it would be the money. And so then what we're trying to do is get the athlete that is intrinsically motivated. Is there a way to turn an athlete from extrinsically to intrinsically? And I'm not sure that there is, because now we're at the core now. Why is this athlete doing this? We're at the why question. Why are they doing this? And if it's about the money, I don't know how else that you could turn that from not being about the money. You see, I don't know, because now the athlete is not really doing it for mastery or pride. They're doing it for something that they're hoping to get. And so I'm not sure you could turn that athlete. So if you don't want to turn it, or you can't turn them from extrinsic to intrinsic, then just turn the extrinsic to use towards them, saying, well, look, if you can increase your track time or your speed or this, then you're going to make even more money, you see. And so if they're extrinsically motivated, just make it about them. Say, okay, fine. If that's what, if that's what you're here to do, is to make a giant contract, then let's help you make the biggest contract that you can. So in order to make more money, this is what I think that you could improve upon. And then here we go. We go right back to goal setting. So if they want to hit the ball further, or they need to throw a faster pitch, or whatever it is they need to do in football, baseball, it doesn't matter. You lay it out as far as their goals. If they're extrinsically motivated for the prize, then help them get the biggest prizes possible with the proper goals. Setting those goals every single day, and go back and, I did this module on goal setting, set it up for them. Help them set it up so it makes sense for themselves to keep them motivated. So whether they're intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated, the success then helps to build grit, because even though one of the goals is to have them have success or small successes on a daily basis, they can see something. Some days are going to be perceived not as a success. That's when they're going to need to be gritty and have a little mental toughness in order to rebound from those inevitabilities. One of the last components of building grit and mental toughness is a thing that is called self-determination. So in self-determination theory, it's, academically, let's say, it is what is motivating, what factors either externally or internally are motivating this athlete. It is a system of controls and motivations that move an athlete from point A to point B. And so it is an extremely powerful tool that you can use as a consultant or as a coach. And as an athlete, it's also it's a revealing type of a tool, simply because the athlete, the sport really, is reflecting back onto the athlete where they are as an athlete. Where do they stand in their sport? The sport itself will act as the coach, if you would, or the disciplinarian. You don't have to do anything. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say you have an athlete that says, look, I want to take my scores down from an average of 77 to an average of 72. Okay, well, that's 5 strokes. Well, if you know anything about golf, that's a heck of a leap. So the closer you get to par in that sport, it's like the law of diminishing return. You got to work seemingly twice as hard to get back half, simply because those strokes are not that easy to get back. So then what you can say is you do an examination of that player's game. The athlete tells you, what do you need to work on? And the athlete says, well, I'm only hitting about 50% of my greens in regulation. Well, there you go. So then you set it up then in a goal map. All right. So if you're only hitting 50% in green regulation, you find out why. I mean, are the tee shots so far out of the fairway that they're just having to pitch back out into the fairway? That'd be an easy fix. Just work on your driver. Get your driver game together. Swing plane or something like that. But then they say, no, I'm hitting about 70% of the fairways. Well, then there you have it. The greens in regulation are a lack of distance control or a lack of accuracy with the irons. And you can even go down even further and say, well, where are they missing greens? There's a tendency to hit them to the right, left, long, something like that. And then you just keep drilling down until you get to the bottom of this thing. 60 to 70% of my misses are long and right, okay? Long and right. So the right part, depending, let's say if they're a right player, they're a right-handed player, the right part could be simply their alignment. Or it could be that they're drawing the ball and the ball is not turning over, or they're pushing the ball, or ball position. Something, you just got to go out there, they got to dig it out of the dirt, like Hogan said. Figure it out. Why are they going to the right? And the long then could be a different thing. So maybe they're in the overestimation. Maybe they have a fear of laying up short or something like that. Maybe they're too aggressive. So there's part of the counseling part of it right there, part of the course management that you'd have to sort of get down a little bit into the psychology of golf and say, look, you're too aggressive, seemingly. You're pedal to the metal on every hole, and that is why you're taking too much club, or something like that. So you really sort of maybe have to have an understanding of the individual's game. But then they're the expert in the game. You may not have to have any kind of insight into the game. Then once you help them lay out, the game becomes the instructor, the disciplinarian, if you would. Now, you lay it out with a goal map. Well, you got to do X, Y, and Z, and in less than, couldn't be 2, 3, 4 weeks, we should start seeing some new results based on this practice schedule that you've set up. Okay, fine. So we come back in 4 weeks and there's been no improvement. Say, well, what's been your practice schedule? Well, I was sort of sick here, and X, Y, and Z here, and A, B, and C. Well, there you go. There you go. Then the spotlight comes back onto the athlete. The responsibility then is self-determinant or not. So then the sport will weed them out. You're not really serious. Not really. It's just all, kind of lip service here. You don't have to say a word as a coach or a consultant. The sport will dictate. And so then you can just let that athlete then dictate where they are and make your determination of how much time that you're going to spend with that athlete. But really, you can simply point out to them, look, this was your goals, and every excuse is valid. I get that. And you don't want to diminish a person's excuse. If they got an excuse, they got an excuse. Could be one or fine. But if they're going to try to compete at the higher echelons of sport, every athlete is injured. I don't know of not many athletes that don't get an injury. And you know what? They have to have a smart healing process, and then that would be a legitimate excuse. But just saying, well, I didn't feel like it today. No, I'm sorry. Then you're not serious. And that's part of grit and being mentally tough. I didn't feel right today. I didn't do that. I had this, that, and everything else. No. The sport then is not going to give them back anything, increased proficiency on their move. Why? Because it takes time to incorporate into their automaticity, long-term memory. And if they're not going to practice it, you're not going to get it. And it's fairly simple. That's the beauty of self-determination. The sport gives back to them what they've given to it, cause and effect. I can't give it to you any simpler than that. There's nothing new under the sun on this type of thing. But the self-determination theory will reflect back onto the athlete so that the consultant then, or the client or the coach, is not at fault unless the consultant or the coach is giving the athlete the wrong information. They don't know what they're talking about. They're not competent. Then it would be that coach's or consultant's fault. But if you're competent and you're giving them the right information, and they've got a place to practice, and they've got those things, they don't have to overcome those obstacles, then the responsibility of success or failure then ultimately will fall back onto the athlete. That's the beauty, and quite frankly, it's also the harshness of self-determination. One of the reasons why an athlete won't achieve a goal that they've stated is, we're going simply down the old rabbit hole there, is about fear. And again, this is the thing about their, certainly on those young athletes, they're afraid of being judged, how they're being perceived by others. They don't want to look incompetent. And then one of the other things I have noticed in my experience is that you got an athlete that has been very good, then they don't believe it themselves. They have the spotlight is on them now. Expectation runs high. So then they feel the pressure to continue on at such a high level, they really don't want that pressure because they're afraid they can't continue on at that level, then they'll self-sabotage. And so they'll self-sabotage because of the fear. It's the fear that will sabotage their success. It gets the heat off of them, something they didn't want it really to begin with. They've lost the fun of the sport. Now all they feel is pressure to continue because of what they think other people expect of them. And in fact, other people don't care, except their immediate family, of course. They really don't. They really don't care. But the young athlete, they think everyone else cares, you see. And so as a consultant or a coach, I have had many conversations with athletes and let them know, look, other than your family, nobody really cares. It doesn't really matter to anybody what you do. You think it matters, but in reality, it really doesn't matter to a lot of people. It's just something, if you ask them who won a tournament last week, they don't know. They just want to be entertained, and if you do well as an athlete, great, fine. But if not, you know what? They're going to be fine too. In fact, in my experience, even the parents don't really care whether the athlete plays the sport or not. Most of the time, they don't really care. They just want the athlete to be happy. But the athlete, certainly the young athlete, they don't want to let the father down. They don't want to let their parents down, their mother down, because of an investment that they've made them. The parents make an investment into you, into me, into the equipment, and this, all the time and everything. And then the athlete, is trying so hard, but then they don't do well, and then they try harder, or they will self-sabotage, maybe because of fear or guilt or something like that. They don't want to let the parents down. They don't want to humiliate themselves in front of strangers or, people that they don't know. And they don't want to let their teammates down, you see. And because all of these things would be an embarrassment to them. Image, self-image, again, is what we're talking about. So on the extreme side of this is something called self-sabotaging behavior. So what an athlete, you see it sometimes. It's not, it's not a real frequent thing, but it's sort of hard to diagnose because, I'll give you an example. An athlete will have a big event that's coming up just down the road, 3, 4, 5, or 6 weeks, and then, mysteriously, they get injured somehow in a freaky accident or something, and then the thing gets attributed to the incident, or the absence of going to the event gets attributed to, I can't compete because I'm injured. Well, the event was being heralded, though, as a huge event. I mean, a lot of expectations, a lot of build up to this event. Athlete wasn't ready. And so in order to get out of that situation, the athlete either gets themselves into an accident or, gets sick or something like that. Gives them the perfect excuse to exit out of there. I think one of the most famous, notorious examples of self-sabotaging behavior is when Mike Tyson bit off a piece of the ear of Evander Holyfield. And so what we saw there in that instance was a fighter that wanted to get out of a situation that he was losing face. And in order to save face, then he created an environment to get him out of a situation without being beaten. So after the fight, they asked Evander Holyfield, why do you think he bit off a piece of your ear? And Evander Holyfield made a very, it was just a matter-of-fact comment. It says every fighter knows how to get out of the fight. You foul. Well, in boxing, foul normally would mean hitting below the belt. You hit 3 times below the belt, normally you'll be disqualified. But for this particular fight, Mike Tyson, and I can look back on it personally, and I have never even seen that, ever. Prior to that, I haven't seen it since. But Mike Tyson was a fighting historian. He was a fight historian. His trainer, the old man, Cus D'Amato, had stated they had watched historic films of fights for many, many decades that Cus had gotten these films. And no doubt Mike learned about ear biting from Cus and watching those old fighters. So he knew how to get out of that situation. And so after the fight, they asked Mike, why did you do that? And Mike pointed to a whelp above either this eye, I can't remember what eye it was, and it was a big whelp above his eye. He says, well, look what happened here. I got to go home and have my children look at me the way I'm looking like now. It's like, what? I mean, you're a professional prize fighter. You don't think your kids have never seen you be cut up or bruised or swollen before. So this was his way of self-sabotaging any kind of success, because he's getting beat. He got beat on their first fight. This was the second fight. He's getting beat again. So if he got beat again, then he is no longer the baddest man on the planet. And that's what Mike was in fear of losing. Fear, then again, is the motivator. Fear of being exposed as, quite frankly, maybe even a fraud. If you look back on Mike Tyson's career, I mean, he was used to knocking people out right and left in the first few rounds, and now he's up against Holyfield, who was really a legitimate fighter, and Mike had been a little older now and gone through a lot in his life, and now the walls of his self-image were crumbling right in front of him. Self-sabotage, he got out of that situation. So if you had told Mike Tyson that at the time, he'd said, that's not happening. That's impossible. It would take a period of reflection and perspective to be able to admit that. So as a consultant or a coach, it's sort of important to be able to recognize that in an athlete. And you don't really want to accuse the athlete of doing that, because it would be embarrassing for them. So just making them aware that a situation, a tournament, an event coming up, it's no big deal. I mean, this, got a huge event coming up. No, we don't. It's not a huge event. It's a nothing event. This is part of mindfulness that I talk about in a future consult. But having these, sort of adjectives, I guess, attached to events. This is a huge fight, and this is going to determine the greatest boxer in the world, or this is going to set the stage for my future. No, it's not. It's just an event. It's no big deal. So that's why, and my thoughts is why you see golfers, they have 3 great rounds. Professional athletes now, PGA Tour pros, 3 great rounds, and then they flame out at the last, right? You say, well, it was the pressure. Yeah, I guess it was the pressure, but maybe part of it was that this tournament they perceived in their mind as being a huge deal, giant, big deal. When in fact, if they could have reframed it in their mind into the proper perspective, said, look, it's just another golf tournament. It's everyone around them that is saying, oh my gosh, this is such a big deal, such a huge deal, got to put that jacket on and so forth. If we can get the athlete into that frame of mind where things it is what it is, doesn't matter, and it's just there. Just do your job, as Belichick would say. Just do the job. Hit the shot. Swing the bat without any kind of importance on this thing. Then that frees the mind to be able to focus on the task at hand. Focusing and concentration are one of the key elements, obviously, of building self-efficacy. Self-efficacy, then, is one of the major components, if not the major component, other than a genetic marker, in building mental toughness. And then when you have an athlete that has enough of that built up into the cognitive bank, and then they get knocked down, then they say, well, okay, I know what I did wrong. I'm going to pick myself back up, and I'm going to, make an adjustment, and I'm going to go forward. That's grit. Grit, that is the perfect definition of grit. But if you have an athlete that has had no success ever, or very little success, and all or most of their athleticism is equated to failure, why would they want to continue on being a punching bag for the sport that they're playing? Why even play the sport? It'd be better just to play a video game with the sport. That way, at least they can sort of predict, what kind of success they're going to have. So this is what I'm saying to you coaches and consultants, is that it's very important to support your athlete, helping them understand, hey, look, this ain't the end of the world. You are not the athlete as far as wins or losses is concerned. You are a terrific person first, and then you're an athlete. So that way, if they do get beat or they have a misstep, then it's not got nothing to do with them as an individual. There is a line there, person and athlete. Let them know and support them and not scream and yell, hopefully in their environment at home, which is, again, a major component in building self-efficacy and, and mental toughness. They've got a supportive family. Hopefully they do. They don't have a screaming parent in the stands, giving them some kind of cognitive ultimatum or something like that. But you as a consultant, help that athlete understand and try to get them in the proper perspective, knowing that this is just a driver. It is just a serve. It is just a pitch like every other one you have done 1,000 times. There is no real big significance here. Not really. And then that will help them hopefully clear out the cobwebs in their mind to be able to hit that shot without all of the noise going on in their heads. One of the last things I want to discuss with you about this topic that we're into now, because this is a real personal thing here, and I touched on a genetic marker that I really believe is prevalent when we're talking about a person that's gritty or has a high level of mental toughness. But if you have a person that is a neurotic, one of the big 5 personality traits, and they're conscientious as well, meaning that they really care about what other people think, then it's something that maybe you'll have a little bit more of a challenge working with, because a person that is neurotic, they don't necessarily have to be a person standing over in a corner with their face in the corner. That's not what I'm talking about as far as athletic neuroticism. I mean a person that's just nervous. There are people in the world that they're just nervous. They just, for whatever reason, genetically, they are just, anxious people. And so this is going to be a little bit more of a challenge for you, is that when you have an athlete that is sort of naturally a nervous person, they're naturally nervous. Other people are naturally confident. And one of the things about confidence, yes, it can be built. There are ways to build a confidence, and I did a module on helping building confidence. But there also, through twin studies, there is also determined that our scientists have determined that there is or there could be a gene that is prevalent in one twin and not in the other. And yet they are absolute, biological twins, the same DNA, can't come out of the womb at the same time. And yet one twin is shy, the other one is an extrovert. How's that possible? Well, it's something about their genetic makeup is different in their personality. One is just full of confidence. Then that one is the one that is standing and sitting in the front row, getting all the attention. Helps them with their confidence. The other one being shy, just reserved, sitting in the back. And leave me alone kind of a thing. And then the other twin is perceived as being more confident because they've gotten all the attention from their parents, because they're in trouble all the time. They're tugging on their mother's apron, so forth and so on. That's just a figure of speech, of course. The other twin, naturally shy. And then you can say, or they have suggested that twin, the extrovert, has the confident gene. They are just naturally confident. Well, maybe they just don't have the fear, maybe, that the other one has. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. But you may have an athlete that falls in one or two of those camps, you see, or one of those camps. You have an athlete, client that is, pedal to the metal and shooting at the moon and doesn't seem to have a lot of fear at all. You may have to gear that person down. That could be one of the people that the Navy says, look, yeah, that person has a lot of grit. That's the person that's going to make it through here unless they get horribly injured or die. You know, that's the kind of people that they're going to get through that SEAL training. But is that really good for being an athlete? They don't know when to quit. So if you got an athlete that doesn't know when to quit, then they'll continue on with an injury, and the injury will continue to get worse and worse. And then all of a sudden they have a permanent injury, you see? But then in their mind, they're the ones that may think, well, you know what? It was worth it. It was worth it. And that's fine. I mean, we're not trying to change a personality type. I'm not even sure that's possible. But at least you can help that athlete make smarter choices, you see. And say, yeah, well, it's great that, you know, you're not a quitter, and that's fine. However, if your goal is over here and you're here and B is the obstacle here, not necessarily, you know, there are other ways to get around that, and then you can still get what you're going for. You can still achieve your goal. It's just going to have to be over here instead of through the rock. You can help that athlete do that, you see. And then you got maybe the anxious athlete, trying your best to help them understand where their anxiety comes from, and then helping them to sort of make sense, if possible, of why they cannot fulfill their goals as their expectations. The anxiety then standing in the way, they're afraid, they're fearful, they're focused on what they're trying to avoid, you see. If you can help them sort of pragmatically understand this is the reason why. And then if they can understand that a level of awareness, then perhaps they can start reshaping their self-talk so that then they can focus and concentrate on the task at hand instead of focusing on what they're trying to avoid. Again, we're going back to motivation here. They're motivated to avoid failure. I don't want to hit it left. I don't want to hit it right. I don't want to lose face. I don't want to be exposed as a fraud. I've got to be the baddest man on the planet still. That's motivated to avoid failure. The self-talk then, or the actions, reflect the inner self-talk. Instead, if you can at least help them understand the mechanics of the brain and say, look, you know, you're programming this yourself. You're programming it yourself. And then help them reframe it, rechange the talk, the self-talk. Say, look, I get it. I understand your motivations here. I understand your goals. And in order to achieve your goal, this is what I think part of it that we can do. A, B, C. And again, we go back to self-determination. And then the responsibility is right back then on the athlete. That is why it is so powerful, self-determination. You can do the best you can. You can lay it out for them. If they buy in, they buy in. If they don't, they don't. So some athletes you just can't reach, and that's just part of it. They're, you know, they have trust issues, or, you know, they just can't seem to understand the mechanics of how the mind operates, or maybe they have that thing about them that they're just naturally neurotic, or they're just naturally anxious, and there's not a lot you can do for that client. But you don't mean that you can't help them to understand where they're coming from, help them to understand how self-talk, perception, and perspective can either help them or hurt them. Once they get to that point and you've done all you can, you turn it over to them, and then there you have it, self-determined. They have to become self-determined. The responsibility has to go back onto the athlete. And so it's not to relieve the client or relieve you as the coach of any responsibility. You're responsible to giving them the right information. You are responsible for not giving them some bad advice. In fact, I would hope that you would not ever give advice, you just give suggestions. Then it's up to the athlete, it's up to the client, then to take that information, either buy in it or not buy in it. Maybe they don't buy in it because of the fact they really didn't want it to begin with. Again, the sport becomes the discipliner here, the disciplinarian, giving them back exactly what they're putting into the sport. It can be a very cruel circle, and I certainly understand it. But it's important that the athlete understands how the brain works as far as performance is concerned. When and if they can get there, then we can take the next step with them, which is this thing called mindfulness. If they can get past these steps of mental toughness and grit, mindfulness is the next step. The mindful athlete is beyond the zone. The mindful athlete is really beyond mental toughness. It's a beautiful place to be if you can get there. And, for the genetically predispositioned athlete, the hard charger, getting to that place of, well, it don't matter, can be a challenging thing. But interestingly, they can, because of the way they do think, maybe they can get there with their built-in self-discipline to get to that place of mindful where everything is what it is. Then that can totally free the mind of any kind of judgment. And then their talent can be showcased to the world, free of anxiety, free of expectations, free of stress. All of these external factors have no influence on them at all. Nothing matters other than point A to point B, or sometimes point A sub 1 to B, if you get my meaning. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that. I know it can be very subjective subject matter, but it's easy to tell an athlete as a coach or a consultant, you just gotta be more mentally tough. You hear some coaches that say that, and just, for an athlete, that just goes right here and goes right out there. And so that's why they bring on people like us to help the athlete understand, what does he mean by that? What is she talking about? Grittiness. What is, how do I increase my mental toughness? What can I do to become more mentally tough? Well, A, B, C, and so forth and so on. So like I said, we're close down to the core of the individual, and that's why it is extremely important to sort of have a fundamental understanding of these concepts and precepts so that you can explain it to them to increase their awareness of these things. And then once they become awareness, which is the first stage, then hopefully their level of confidence will continue to increase. So I look forward to seeing you again very soon.